Hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a heartbreaking and mysterious story where Than begins to question everything he once believed after discovering the shocking truth about Quynh and Tam's relationship. If Quynh truly loves Tam, then why does Mrs. Huang keep trying to turn everyone against him? And who is really hiding the truth behind the attack on Quynh's mother? Stay with us until the end, because this emotional story is filled with secrets, suspicion, and painful choices that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any upcoming videos. The alley was unusually quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that made every distant sound feel heavier than it should. A dog barked somewhere far away. A bicycle rolled slowly past the entrance of the narrow street. Faded sunlight stretched across the old concrete walls as Than stood beside his motorbike, unable to take another step forward. His eyes remained fixed on the small house at the end of the alley, where Quynh was gently helping Tam carry a basket inside. It was such a simple moment, almost painfully ordinary, yet something about it made Than's chest tighten with confusion. Only a few hours earlier, he had accidentally run into Quynh near the entrance of the neighborhood. At first, the meeting had felt harmless, just another casual conversation between business partners after signing a contract together a few days ago. But everything changed the moment Than realized who Quynh truly was. The man standing in front of him, speaking calmly with tired but sincere eyes, was not only his business partner, he was Tam's husband. That truth alone was enough to leave Than unsettled for the rest of the afternoon. Mrs. Huang had spoken about Tam many times before. She had described her as someone quietly suffering beside a husband who could not properly care for her. She had painted Quynh as irresponsible, unreliable, and emotionally distant. Yet the man Than met earlier did not resemble that description at all. If anything, Quynh looked exhausted from carrying too much pain for too long. Than could still remember every detail from their conversation inside the small house. The place itself was modest and cramped, filled with worn furniture and signs of financial struggle. But there was warmth there too, the kind of warmth that could not easily be staged. Quynh had spoken openly about his mother being attacked and about the growing suspicion surrounding Mrs. Huang. His voice remained controlled the entire time, but the anger hiding underneath was impossible to miss. "I still don't have proof," Quynh had said quietly while staring down at the untouched cup of tea in front of him. "I don't want to accuse anyone unfairly, but my mother was hurt, and somebody has to answer for that." Than remembered the way Quynh clenched his jaw after saying those words, as if forcing himself not to lose control. There was pain in his expression, but not hatred, and somehow that made everything even harder for Than to process, because dishonest people usually push too hard. They exaggerated. They demanded sympathy. But Quynh never once tried to convince Than to take his side. He simply spoke like a man who was exhausted from watching the people he loved suffer, while the truth remained hidden somewhere beyond his reach. Standing outside the alley now, Than replayed that conversation over and over again in his mind. He thought about Tam's silence whenever family was mentioned. He thought about the sadness that always lingered behind her smile. None of it matched the image of manipulation Mrs. Huang had carefully built for him. And yet Than still could not fully reject her words either. That uncertainty was beginning to consume him. If everything is fake, Than thought silently, while watching Quynh adjust the basket in Tam's hands before taking the heavier side himself. Then why do they look so real together? The question echoed inside his head with no answer. Suddenly, fragmented images flashed through his mind one after another. Quynh's injured mother, lying weakly in bed. Mrs. Huang's anxious expression during their last conversation. Tam lowering her eyes as though carrying guilt too heavy to speak aloud. Then Quynh's voice returned sharply in his memory. "I'll find the truth, no matter what." Than exhaled slowly and stepped away from the alley before anyone noticed him standing there. By the time he reached the main road, evening had already begun settling over the city. The streetlights flickered awake one by one, while motorbikes rushed past in endless streams of noise. But none of it managed to quiet the thoughts inside his mind. That night, Than sat alone in his apartment without touching the dinner he had bought earlier. The room felt strangely suffocating. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same images repeating endlessly. Tam quietly handing Quynh a glass of water. Quynh speaking about his injured mother with restrained anger. Mrs. Huang warning him not to trust appearances too easily. Than leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face tiredly. The more he thought about everything, the more he felt trapped between two different versions of reality. If Mrs. Huang was lying, then Tam had been unfairly judged this entire time. But if Mrs. Huang was telling the truth, then Quynh was far better at hiding his real nature than Than ever imagined possible. Either way, somebody was hiding something. And for the first time since becoming involved in this situation, Than realized he could no longer stay emotionally detached from it. He cared too much now, especially when it came to Tam. That realization unsettled him more than anything else. After pacing around the room for nearly an hour, Than finally stopped beside the window and picked up his phone. He stared at Mrs. Huang's contact name for several long seconds before finally pressing call. The line connected almost immediately. "Than?" Mrs. Huang's voice sounded gentle and familiar, as always. "Is everything okay?" Than hesitated before answering. "I need to ask you something." A brief silence followed. "Of course," she replied softly. "Come over, if you want." Than ended the call soon after, but miles away, the calm expression on Mrs. Huang's face disappeared the moment she lowered her phone. Fear slowly crept into her chest. Why did Than suddenly want to meet tonight? Had Quynh already said something to him? Had Than started doubting her? Mrs. Huang sat down heavily in the dark room, trying to steady her breathing as anxiety tightened around her thoughts. For days, she had managed to keep everything balanced carefully enough to avoid suspicion. But now that balance felt dangerously unstable, she knew Quynh was still searching for answers, and if he continued digging deeper, eventually he might discover something impossible to hide. "No," she whispered to herself while clasping her trembling hands together. Than still doesn't know anything for certain. As long as doubt remained inside him, she still had a chance to pull him back to her side. Slowly, Mrs. Huang forced herself to calm down and began planning the conversation ahead. She could not push too hard. She could not sound bitter or defensive. Instead, she needed Than to sympathize with Tam again. That was the safest way to guide his emotions without making him realize he was being influenced. Meanwhile, across town, Than grabbed his jacket and prepared to leave his apartment. But deep inside, another uncomfortable truth had already begun forming quietly in his heart. The more he learned about Tam, the harder it became to stop thinking about her. Mrs. Huang's house felt unusually silent when Than arrived later that evening. The lights inside the living room were dim, casting long shadows across the old furniture, while the faint sound of television noise echoed somewhere deeper in the house. The moment she opened the door, Mrs. Huang greeted him with the same calm smile she always used, but Than immediately noticed the brief flicker of tension in her eyes before she turned away. It was subtle, almost invisible, but after everything he had been thinking about, Than could no longer ignore small details like that. "You came so late," Mrs. Huang said softly, while pouring tea into 2 small cups. "You must have been busy." Than sat down slowly across from her, studying her expression in silence for a few seconds before answering. "I met Quynh today." The room suddenly felt heavier. Mrs. Huang's hand paused for the briefest moment above the teapot before she forced herself to continue pouring as though nothing had happened. "Really?" she asked calmly. "Where?" "Near Tam's house," Than replied, while carefully watching her reaction. "I didn't know he was her husband." Mrs. Huang lowered her gaze immediately, pretending to focus on the teacups instead of his face. "Yes," she said quietly, "that girl has suffered a lot." Than didn't respond right away. He remembered the image of Quynh carrying heavy bags for Tam earlier that afternoon. He remembered the way Tam looked at Quynh when she thought nobody else was paying attention. There had been comfort in her eyes, peace even. It did not resemble the relationship Mrs. Huang had described before. "He also signed a contract with my company recently," Than added after a moment. "I spent several hours talking with him today." Mrs. Huang finally looked up again. "Then you probably understand why I worry about Tam," she said gently. "Some men know exactly how to appear kind." Than stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. And she did, slowly, carefully, never raising her voice, never sounding bitter. That was what made her words dangerous. "Tha," Mrs. Huang said, while lightly stirring her tea, "a man who truly loves his wife would never let her live like that." Than frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You saw the house, didn't you?" she asked softly. "The old clothes, the way she keeps trying to save money for him. That girl barely thinks about herself anymore." Than's chest tightened involuntarily because every word she said was technically true. He had seen those things himself. But somehow, hearing them from her felt different now, more calculated. "People struggle financially sometimes," Than replied carefully. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad husband. Mrs. Huang gave a small, almost sad smile. I know life is difficult, but Tam just lost her child not long ago. Than looked up sharply. Mrs. Huang continued speaking before he could interrupt. And even after everything she went through, she still has to handle everything alone. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house. A woman can love someone deeply and still suffer beside them. Her tone remained gentle the entire time, but each sentence settled heavily inside Than's mind. Because once again, there was truth hidden inside her words. Tam really did look exhausted sometimes. She really did continue sacrificing quietly without complaining. Than hated that he could no longer tell whether Mrs. Huang was honestly concerned or deliberately guiding his emotions somewhere she wanted them to go. Quynh doesn't seem careless, Than finally said. He looked worried about her. Mrs. Huang nodded slowly, almost as if she expected that answer. Some men are very good at saying the right things, she replied softly. But words and actions are different. Than looked away without answering. The confusion inside him only deepened. Part of him wanted to reject everything Mrs. Huang was implying, but another part kept replaying the image of Tam wearing the same faded clothes day after day. Before he could organize his thoughts, Mrs. Huang quietly leaned back in her chair and looked at him more carefully. Honestly, she said after a pause, I think you care about her more than you realize. Than immediately frowned. What? You keep worrying about her, Mrs. Huang continued gently. You notice the things other people ignore, and unlike Quynh, you're stable. You have a good job. You know how to take care of people. Than's expression hardened slightly. I never thought about interfering in their relationship. I'm not saying you should, Mrs. Huang replied quickly. I just think Tam deserves someone who can truly protect her. The room fell silent after that. Than stared down at the untouched tea in front of him, while his thoughts became impossibly tangled. He hated how uncomfortable the conversation made him feel, because despite everything, he could not deny one terrifying truth. He had been thinking about Tam constantly, more than he should, more than was appropriate, and Mrs. Huang clearly noticed it too. A few minutes later, Than finally stood up to leave. Mrs. Huang walked him to the door with the same gentle expression she had worn all evening. But the moment he stepped outside, her calm demeanor slowly disappeared again. She closed the door quietly and leaned against it while exhaling shakily. The conversation had not gone exactly the way she hoped, but at least Than was still uncertain. That uncertainty was important. As long as he continued doubting Quynh, everything could still be controlled. Meanwhile, Than walked slowly down the dimly lit street with his hands buried inside his pockets. The cold night air did nothing to clear his thoughts. If anything, it only made the confusion worse. He kept replaying every sentence from both sides over and over again. Quynh insisting he only wanted the truth. Mrs. Huang quietly reminding him of Tam's suffering. Neither side sounded completely dishonest. That was the problem. By the time Than reached the main road, traffic had thinned considerably. A few small shops were closing for the night, while tired workers rode home beneath flickering streetlights. Than stopped walking for a moment when he suddenly noticed a familiar motorbike parked across the street near a small clothing store. His eyes narrowed immediately. It was Quynn's. Without fully understanding why, Than slowly stepped closer while staying partially hidden behind a row of parked scooters. Through the brightly lit storefront window, he saw Tam standing awkwardly beside a rack of clothes, while Quynh held up different shirts in front of her with an amused smile. "Try this one," Quynh said. Even from outside, Than could hear the warmth in his voice. Tam laughed nervously and shook her head. "No, it's too expensive." "Since when are you allowed to say no today?" Quynh teased gently. Than stood completely still as he watched the interaction unfold naturally between them. There was no performance, no exaggeration. Quynh carefully adjusted the collar of one shirt against Tam's shoulder before stepping back to look at her properly. And for a brief moment, Tam smiled in a way Than had never seen before. It was peaceful, soft, safe. Something inside Than shifted painfully, because in that moment, everything Mrs. Huang had told him earlier began falling apart again. If Quynh was pretending, then why did his affection look so effortless? And if Tam was truly trapped in an unhappy marriage, then why did she seem calmer standing beside Quynh than she ever did anywhere else? Than remained frozen outside the shop, while the questions inside him grew heavier than ever. Then suddenly, as Quynh turned slightly toward the cashier, Than noticed something strange near the bottom of the motorbike parked outside. A streak of dried mud clung to the side near the wheel, fresh enough to stand out beneath the streetlight. Than stared at it silently as a memory flashed through his mind. The abandoned dirt path near the place where Quynn's mother had been attacked. Slowly, Than lifted his eyes again toward the shop window, his heartbeat beginning to quicken as a new suspicion quietly started forming inside his mind. Than's world begins to change after he accidentally discovers that Quynh, his recent business partner, is actually Tam's husband. Confused by the warmth and sincerity he witnesses between them, Than starts questioning everything Mrs. Huang once told him. While Quynh quietly searches for the truth behind the attack on his mother, Mrs. Huang desperately tries to manipulate Than into doubting him. As emotions grow more complicated, Than finds himself drawn deeper into Tam's painful life and unable to ignore the growing feelings inside his heart. But the more he learns, the harder it becomes to know who is truly telling the truth. Behind the quiet family dinners, small acts of love, and moments of sacrifice lies a hidden secret waiting to be uncovered, one that could destroy the fragile peace between all of them forever.